of Amud Aleph, where again at the very top of the page, the Rav is here bright and early to buy and sell chametz for whoever wants. Apparently he's giving very good prices, so come early, beat the rush. All right, so we are in the middle of the sugya of zimun. Who is mezamen? When you mezamen? Can two be mezamen? I want to start with a story. So, a minute, hold on. Rav Zera Chalash. Rav Zera was sick. So, Al Gabi Rav Avo. So, Rav Avo came to visit him. Kabil Alei Rav Avo accepted upon himself the following. I matpach, mispach, I'm not sure how you pronounce that. I mitbach ktina charich shaki. If ktina charich shaki, who is Zera, that's what they called him. If he gets well, I'm going to make a Yom Tov. It's going to be a Chag festival for the rabbis. So why did they call Zera ktina charich shaki? Take a look at the top Rashi. Rashi says Kachai Kaira Zera. That's what they called him. Zera, they called him Ktina Chorich Shaki, meaning the small one, Ktina the cotton. Chorich. Shaki had, I think Chorich means he had burnt legs. Why do you have burnt legs? Because the gemorah says in Rashi brings the Seichas Apalim that of Zera, he did 100 fasts. In all of that, he shouldn't go to Gehenna. The fire of hell shouldn't have any effect on him. And every 30 days he fasted. Every 30 days he wanted to test this out. Don't try this at home, kids. Every 30 days he would go until he turn on the fire and he'd jump in to see if fire has any effect on him. And the fire didn't have any effect on him. But after a while, the rabbis called on and it says, some or whatever. They looked at him and they were like, hey, what's going on over here? And then he burnt his legs. His shukayim got burnt, so they called him the small guy with the burnt legs. So it's interesting. You see how important it is. I take from here. I didn't think about this before. But you see from how important it is to do things b'tzina. If you learn Torah, you shouldn't do it on YouTube in front of thousands of people. You should do it privately. No one should know about it. Humility, people shouldn't know. Even if you're doing something great. Here he is. He's doing 100 fasts. But as soon as people find out about it, stopped working. That's it. Welcome, Shalom. So, says the Gemara. So he made a party. What happened? Atbach. Of course, Zera got better. This guy, the Kabbalah, that they're gonna make a party. Atbach, he got better. So Avid Sudasa l'chol Rabban. So Zera, so Rav Avo threw a huge party. He made a masiba. He threw a big bash. He threw a massive party for all the rabbis. Everyone should come. Rav Zera got better. So what happened? Kimata Lemishri, when it came to Lemishri, they came to wash hands, to eat the bread. Amalei Rav Zera, Lishalan Mas, Rav Zera. So Rav Avo, the guy who made the party, turns to Rav Zera and says, you should make the bracha for us. You should make the maitzi. You should go ahead and be maitzi everyone. Without maitzi. So what happened? Amalei Rav Zera, Amalei Leisava Lamar Lahad Rabbi Yechanan. So Rav Zera turns to Rav Avo and says, "Well, you don't hold of this Rabbi Yechanan. The Amar Balabais Meitzaya. Kut Rabbi Yechanan. Who's the guy that washes the mitzvah? That's what we do in every home. The Balabais makes a mitzvah. So it turns Rav Zera to Rav Avo and says, well, you don't hold this Rabbi Yechanan. That the Balabais is supposed to say a mitzvah. So Sharalahu. So Rav Avo said, okay, I'll wash. He washed. When it came to bench, so Mazain, Amalei, Nivrach Mat. So he said, okay, Rav Zera, now you go ahead and you bench for us. So he came back to him and he said to him, Leisol Amar, hold on Rav Huna. You don't hold a Rav Huna? The Min Bavel, the Amal Beit Semavach, Kunt Rav Huna, the one that washed, he is the one that should bench. So the Gemara says, V'iyu commands what was he holding? Why did he want to give a benching to someone else? Why did he not hold this Rav Huna, The one that washes, he's the one that benches. He held like the Rabbi Yochanan. He holds like Rabbi Yochanan, who said in the name of Mishum Bar Yochai, Balabayis Beitzeh. Yeah, the Balabayis, he's the one, the owner of the house. He is the one that washes, says a Meitzi. V'ayreach mevarech. The guest is the one that leads the Birchas HaMazon. So that's why he wanted to give it to Rav Zera. You give it to whoever you want. Balabayis Beitzeh Kadesh Yivtze Bayin Yofer. Why should the household owner, why should he wash? He should cut nice pieces of bread. He should cut big pieces of bread and give everyone a nice piece. Ayin Yofer, with a good eye, with a generous eye. Why should the guest be the one that leads the benching? In order that he should not only bless Hashem, he should also be Mevarech, he should bless the Balabayas, his host. My Mevarech, what does he bless the host? He says the following, Yiratzai, may find favor, that the host should never be embarrassed. He should have no shame, not in this world and not in the next world. It's interesting to think about it, that you could pray that someone shouldn't get Gehenna. Someone should have no shame in the next world. If a guy needs shame in order to have a kapara, why shouldn't he get whatever's happening, and why should he get Gehenna? The Muslim, you could pray that someone shouldn't have Gehenna. I didn't say anyone discussing it, but it's a gemorah. You could pray that someone should have no shame, not in this world, and not in the next world. In this world, I understand. You pray someone shouldn't have shame. But a guy needs kapara, a guy needs forgiveness. He needs shame, maybe. Interesting. Rebbe added the following. My host should be incredibly successful with all of his possessions. His possessions and our possessions should all be successful and close to the town. The Satan shouldn't have any shlita, he shouldn't have any control, not in his things, not in our things. He changes gears to he should have no thought of sin, not in this world, from now and forever. He shouldn't have any thought of a sin or any actual sin for now and forever. That's his tefillah. It's interesting that he throws in there also nechasav v'nechaseinu, that his nechasim and our nechasim shouldn't have any. They should all be mutzlach. They should all be successful. Why do you throw in our nechasim with the nechasim of the balabais when you're praising him? I don't know. I guess the guy should say it b'leiv shalom. Once you're saying it, you say it with kavanah. Okay. I heard a story about they asked the guy, why is it when someone gives you a bracha, you say, oh, thank you very much. But someone gives you a curse, so for 2 weeks you're shaking. Yeah, because when someone gives you a curse, you know he means it with Lev Shalom. You know he means it with his whole heart. So you're petrified. But here, the guy gives you a bracha, you think, he doesn't really mean it. So here, this guy really means it because he's blessing himself. So you know he means it. Says the gemorah. It's also interesting. Varech mevarech. Before we had it in the gemorah beforehand, that who's mevarech? They thought originally we had these Rav Yehuda bar Meima, Ma'abar Vashi, Rav Achim Medifti. They all ate together. They didn't know who should bench because they were all the same level. They thought you have to give it to the Adam Gadol. So much so that if there is no Adam Gadol, there's no one that's bigger than anyone else, you don't have a Zimun. And here we see that you don't give it to the Adam Gadol, you give it to the Reach. It could be the Balabais is bigger. The host is maybe a much bigger Talmud Chacham, but you give it to the Reach. So what's going on over here? Do you give it to the Adam Gadol? Do you give it to the Reach? So first of all, the Shulchan Aruch, I think, if I remember correctly, says you're supposed to give it to the Adam Gadol. He's allowed to be Mavatar, and he's allowed to be Michael. Say you give it to whoever, you give it to someone else. I don't need it. I don't want it. Give it to whoever you want. But lechatchila, you should give it to the biggest. Maybe if you have Aruchim, so you could say like this: the Gemara before was talking about there was no guest, there was no host. They were together eating wherever it was. They went to a restaurant. They were on the journey. They ate together. There was no host. There was no guest. So therefore you give it to the biggest one. Here there's a host and there's a guest. You give it first to the guest. Where there is no guest, if you're sitting all of you together in your house, so the most kosher of a person should do it. Says the gemorah. Adhechem brichas hamazon. Adhechem brichas hazimun. Massive machlekes showing here what is going on. We're going to start with Rashi. Adhechem brichas hazimun. What is brichas hazimun? Rav Nachman Omar ad nevarech. Rabbi said nevarech, ish Hashem nevarech. That's the zimun. Rav Sheshes Omar ad hazon. Brichas hazimun includes the whole first bracha till hazon es hakol, including the first bracha of benching. Take a look in Rashi. What's going on over here? It's actually the fourth narrow line in Rashi. Adhechem brichas hazimun. You need three people to say this. According to Rashi, the Gemara is saying that when you have two people, according to the first opinion, you do not say, according to Rav Sheshes, you don't say brichas hazan if you only have two people. The first bracha and benching is only when you have three people. Massive chiddush. We're going to see, let's see Taisa's why it's a massive chiddush, but that's how Rashi understands the Gemara. The Gemara is not just saying, what do you say, what does he say out loud? According to Rashi, the Gemara is saying, what is zimun? Zimun is the first bracha according to Sheshes. According to the other opinion, it's only the first thing you say before the bracha. Take a look at Taisa. I say because zimun. Taisa says, Pirish Rashi, Mantin ad azan, v'azan b'chal shnayim en mevarach en azan. If you have two people, according to Rashi, you don't say brichas hazan. You don't say the first brach and bench according to Sheshes. Why? The take place is us, leinira. The brichas hazan daraisa. The first bracha is daraisa, is biblical. Why would you not say the first bracha if you have two people? V'idlich yachid patamine. V'ayid hakaim elank Rav Sheshes bisuri. We passing like Rav Sheshes when it comes to isur as opposed to mammon. So l'chai we passing like this Rav Sheshes. You bench by yourself, you only say two brachas. Everywhere in Shas, it talks about brachas and mazon, shalish brachas. Main shalish. We know benching is three brachas. The fourth bracha we're going to see at Teva Meitiv is Darabon. But the first, we always call benching three brachas. According to Sheshes, it's two brachas. The first bracha is on, that's only when you have a zimun. For Daicha Klaima the Mara Ela B'yesh Zimun Rav Sheshes, it's very far-fetched, it's a stretch to say whenever the Gemara calls the main shalish, it means the fear of Sheshes, when you've got three people, it's three brachas, but normally it's only two brachas. We know every day, take a look. This is the Messiah and Klai Yisrael. Everyone says three brachas, and people don't say two brachas. What's going on over here? So Tais has a whole different malach. So skip a few lines. This Gemara is going on what we spoke about before. Our Gemara is discussing the case where three people ate together and one guy wants to get up and leave. So he's allowed to get up, so he's not allowed to get up and leave. Sorry. Three guys eat together, two guys want to bench, one guy's still eating. He doesn't want to bench yet. He doesn't want to bench, he's still eating. So Gemara says, if two guys are still eating, they can carry on eating. But if one guy's still eating, he should stop and bench. He should stop and do the zimun. And then after the zimun, he can carry on eating. So according to Taisus, our Gemara is discussing how far does he have to listen into the zimun? When can he start eating again? One guy has to stop for two, put your food down, answer the zimun. Where does he have to wait till he's got to wait till the two people get to Adavarach. It's a machlekes of Sheshes and Tanaka and the first man Damar. Do they have to go till Hazan or just Rabbi Nevarech? And from there on, he's allowed to carry on eating. The Rashba and Rosh don't like Taisus Prat. They don't like Rashi also, but they say that's not the Mashmayis because there is an opinion in that Gemara that the first guy doesn't just have to put the food down and carry on eating afterwards. He's got to put the food down and bench. In which case, there's no machlekes. So according to Rashba and Rosh, the machlekes is the different Gemara we had before, where three guys are eating and one guy starts leaving. Right, and then they call out there and they say, Rabbi said Avarach, and he's allowed to answer. So when does that guy have to stay there and listen from the street with the door open? So it's machlekes till Nevarech or till Hazan for the first bracha. Okay, back to the Gemara. So we've got this machlekes of Nachman and Rosh Hashanah. And we saw Tais says passing like Rosh Hashanah normally. Rachman Amad Dvarech, Rosheshes Amad Azon. Neima Ketanoi. Let us assume that this machlekes of Nachman Rosheshes is based on a machlekes Tanoim. It's an old machlekes. It's an old machlekes. They are the authors of this machlekes. The machlekes is a machlekes Tanoim. The Tani, it says in the Brisa, Chada Birchas Hamazon Shnayim V'Shleisha. Tani Chada Birchas Hamazon Shnayim V'Shleisha. Sometimes Birchas Hamazon is 2, and sometimes it's 3. The Tanya Idich, another Brisa says Shleisha V'Arba. Sometimes it's 3, sometimes it's 4. So what? According to both of these brises, whether it's sometimes 2, sometimes 3, or sometimes 3, sometimes 4, Hatayva Meitiv is definitely not one of the brachas included. Hatayva Meitiv is definitely the Rabbanon. That's not one of the calculations here. So Ma'ilabakam, is this not the old machlekes? According to the opinion that, according to the first brise, it says sometimes it's 2, sometimes it's 3. Adazon is Zimun is an Adazon, and therefore sometimes it's 2 and sometimes it's 3. In other words, if there's 2 people, you only have 2 brachas. If there's 3 people, you have a zon, so you got 3 brachas. According to the Brisa, it says sometimes it's 4, Kosova ad Nevarech. Zimun is only ad Nevarech, so you always have 3. And when do you have 4? If you have a Zimun, you have 4. So that's the machlekes. And the gemorah wants to say that this machlekes of Nachman Rosheshes, it's the same machlekes. Is that machlekes Tanaim? The gemorah answers like, no. Rav Nachman mitas Taimei. Rosheshes mitas Taimei. Each one can say that both of these brises go smoothly with their opinion. It's not going to contradiction. Rav Nachman mitas Taimei dukolam nevarich. According to Rav Nachman, you always benching the zimun is only ad nevarich. It's not with the first bracha. So mandal mashalish va'arba shapir. So that's very gishmak. 3 or 4 makes sense. You always have 3 brachas. If there's 2 people, you make 3 brachas. If there's 3 people, now you've got 4. You've got the whole Rabbeis and Nevarich. It's also a bracha. So why is it sometimes 2, sometimes 3? What's that Brisa talking about? This is talking about the workers who eat. Workers, they include the third bracha and the second bracha together, so therefore they only have 3 brachas. So they knock off these pilim, the workers, they knock off one of the brachas, so sometimes they only have 2 brachas. If they're not pilim, they have 3 brachas. But if they're pilim, if they're workers, they only have 2 brachas. Rav Sheshes Mitare is a time at the Kula Amada Zon. Rav Sheshes says, no. According to his opinion, according to Rav Sheshes, the zimun is the first bracha. So mandal mishtayim v'shalosh shapir. So now we understand 2 or 3. Why? If you've got 2 people, you say 2 brachas. If you've got 3 people, you say 3 brachas with azan. Mandal mishalosh v'arba. So why do you sometimes have 4 brachas? Kasava teiva meitiv d'oraisa. This opinion is that the 4th bracha, birchas teiva meitiv, is biblical. So therefore, we've settled the issue. Rav Nachman and Rav Sheshes can both go with both shitas in the Brisa. Either you have 2 brachas because it's the bracha of Payalim, or the shita that is 4 brachas is because he holds that Teva Meitis is Doraisa is biblical. Omar Rav Yosef. Says Rav Yosef, that you should know that Teva Meitiv la Doraisa. The 4th bracha, Teva Meitiv, that's not Doraisa. Sharei, how do I know that? The fact that the workers, according to the Brisa, don't say Tova Meitiv, that means that it's not biblical. If it would be biblical, they'd have to say it. According to Rav, Tova Meitiv is not the Raisa. Sharei Pesach Baruch. How do I know Tova Meitiv is not the Raisa? Because you start the bracha of Tova Meitiv with the Baruch, ve'ein chaysin baba Baruch. You end up with Laila Malach Haseni. You don't say Baruch at the end. In other words, it's a long bracha. It starts with the Baruch, but it doesn't end with the Baruch, and therefore it's not the Raisa. How do you know this? What's he going on? What's he saying? Kedetanya. It says in the Brisa, Kol bracha is kulon every bracha that we make. Pesach ben bebaruch, you start with the baruch. V'chaysim ben bebaruch, and you end with the baruch. Chutz, except for the following cases. Chutz and birchas aperis, except for when you say a bracha on food, brachat Hashem b'priates. There's nothing in the middle. There's no bakosh in the middle. There's no tefillah in the middle. You just say one baruch. You don't say brachat Hashem b'kedim alachalom, brachat Hashem b'priates. You just say brachat Hashem b'priates. Ubirchas ha-mitzvahs, you make a mitzvah. Brachat Hashem b'kedim alachalom, laniach tefillin. You don't say again brachat Hashem. Ubirchas smucha lechaverto. Now, when you have a bracha that's next to another bracha, you don't have to start with a baruch, because you ended with a baruch. So now that baruch leans into the second bracha. You don't have to start with another baruch. So you say brachat Hashem gal Yisrael, or you say brachat Hashem, bad example, very bad example. You say brachat Hashem yitzem ha'eros avarabba. You don't say brachat Hashem avarabba. It's a second. Avarabba is a second bracha. You don't have to start with another bracha because you're coming from the last bracha. That bracha carries into the second text. You're saying bracha achrayna shakriya shema, the last bracha kriya shema. It doesn't start with the baruch and with the bracha. Yesh mehen shepesach be'mebarach ve'en chayz be'baruch. Sometimes it starts with the baruch ve'en chayz be'baruch. It does not end with the baruch. Turn the page. Ben vav beis. V'yesh mehen shechayz be'mebarach ve'en pesach be'baruch. And sometimes it signs off with the baruch, but it doesn't start with the baruch. So basically, by saying you've got all four. Beginning and end no beginning, beginning and no end. Hatayva meitiv, says our gemorah, Hatayva meitiv, Pesach bebaruch, ve'ein chaysim bebaruch, nechal de bracha b'fnei atzmei. Hatayva meitiv, the fourth bracha, which is a smucha lechaverta, you still start with the baruch. You see from this that you start Hatayva meitiv with the baruch. You see from this that it's not a bracha b'fnei atzma. It's not a bracha in and of itself. Rashi explains, Shari kvar pasuk b'bracha rishon. You've got a bracha beforehand. So the last smucha lavarati she'enim mevarechas hamazon ela kvur sarugei beito tiknuah. The fourth bracha is not d'oraisa. This is a separate bracha, nothing to do with brichas hamazon, nothing to do with the food we eat. We're thanking Hashem for the miracle of arugei beitar, which I'll just recap it quickly. Actually, we'll keep going. Maybe I'll see if we can recap later. We'll do a few more lines of gemorah. Another proof that Teva Beit is not the Raisa, because in the house of the Avel, you don't say it, because it says in the Paisa. In the house of the Avel, Shari Oikon is a base of Avel, Ketanya Maya, what do you say in the house of the Avel? Someone that's mourning the dead. Bacha Teva Meitiv. You say Teva Meitiv. The fourth bracha is Teva Meitiv. Rabbi Kiva Omer Baruch Dayan Emes. Rabbi Kiva says no, you don't say Teva Meitiv, you say Baruch Dayan Emes. Teva Meitiv Dayan Emes. Like what? You say Teva Meitiv, you don't say Dayan Emes. Aleima Afa Teva Meitiv. According to the first opinion, you say also Dayan Emes and also Teva Meitiv. Again, we've seen from here that that it's not Doraisa. So what happened in Arugei Beitar? We'll do a quick recap. Why are we saying the fourth bracha and brichas hamazon? It's very strange. Why is it that we mention Arugei Beitar and benching? First of all, when did it happen? Well, Arugei Beitar was in year CE 135, right? 135 years. It was after the Churban Beis Hamikdash, after the Churban Yerushalayim. There was a Bar Kochva revolt, massive Bar Kochva tried revolting against the Romans. They had a massive army, and what happened? The Romans got very upset. The Hadrian was the Caesar, the emperor, and I think the general at the time was Servus, and basically Beitar was a town with hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people. The Gemara says there's millions of people there. And the Churban of Beitar was worse than the Churban of Yerushalayim. They killed, estimates are, according to the Roman text, they killed approximately 600,000 people. According to the Jewish text, they killed way more than 600,000 people. It was the biggest Churban in the history of Klal Yisrael. And Chazal says that was the end of the yeshiv in that Yisrael. That destroyed Klal Yisrael. That was the end. And basically, the Romans, it was a common punishment they used to do for people who were heretics. The Romans, they said, you're not allowed to bury the dead. It should be a sign. And Hadrian didn't let them bury the dead. For many, many years, the dead were lying in the fields, women and children, hundreds of thousands of them, unburied, until Antoninus became the emperor and he said you could bury the dead. And it was a tremendous simcha. That's why we say Atayv Meitiv. It was Atayv that they were allowed to be buried. Always Atayv Meitiv is good for you and good for someone else. So it was good for them that they were allowed to be buried. It's good for the neshama to be buried. And it was Meitiv that the bodies didn't smell leis srichu. The gufis didn't smell. A miracle happened that for years these bodies were lying in the fields. They did not rot. And they made this bracha, Atayv Meitiv. You should remember forever. The question is why is this in benching? Why are we mentioning every time you have a piece of bread, you're supposed to remember the Churban Beitar, the bodies didn't compose? So so some say it's because you just had a massive Suda, it's a time to party, you had a good time. You should remember the bad stuff. You shouldn't have too much fun in life. I don't know. Whatever it is, you should remember the miracle, remember the Churban Beitar. According to that, you're not remembering the miracle, you're remembering the fact that the bodies decompose. Or a person should remember Chayit and Libay. Don't eat too much, you're going to decompose. You're not Churban, but you're not one of the Beitar guys, you're going to have a miracle, your body's not going to decompose. So don't eat too much. Don't get too much into Olam Hazeh. Others say that since the Churban Yerushalayim this was the end of the Churban Yerushalayim. That's why we just said, B'nai Brachim of Yerushalayim. We're davening for Yerushalayim. We're remembering the great gift of Yerushalayim. Therefore, we mentioned the Churban Beitar, which was the end of the Churban Yerushalayim. That's why it's mentioned over here. Taisus goes into the whole big Shakti Vitari over here, goes into each bracha, what we say that's connected, that's not connected, when we start with Baruch, when we don't start with Baruch. Okay, we have another, Shul seems to be starting early over here, so we're going to wrap up over here. Thank you very much, Rabbi Isai. Appreciate it very much. Have a wonderful day.